welcome, and especially to our new viewers in the tri-state region who can now watch us on digital broadcast channel 25.3. No change for those of you watching on cable. On today's program, the Long Island Railroad Reborn. Studies predict the planned terminus at Grand Central plus new routes will add value to more than 500,000 homes, make commuting quicker, and boost the regional economy. But don't we need more tunnels under the Hudson too? So also today, rebuilding after Sandy. In New Jersey, it's nostalgia versus conservation. In New York, it's steel dykes versus spongy architecture. And in our weekly segment, Public Intellectual, where we tell of new research that changes our thinking, we challenge the Gladwellian notion that 10,000 hours of practice can make us perfect. First, regional planning. It's not something that comes naturally to the rivalrous governments in the tri-state area, but since the 1920s, the decidedly non-governmental Regional Plan Association has tried to encourage cooperation and thinking ahead. The RPA says it's time for a new overall plan for the region, and their recent study of the Long Island Railroad gives us a glimpse of how even a small change, like being able to get off the Lirr on the east side of Manhattan, can have a huge impact. Joining us, Bob Yaro, president of the Regional Plan Association, and Juliette Michaelson, the RPA's vice president for strategic initiatives and author of the Long Island Railroad Study. Welcome to both of you. Thank you for coming in.
Good to be here.
Juliette, let's start with the Lirr. A lot of viewers probably don't even realize that this is headed for Grand Central. When is it going to happen?
Well, it's due to come online in 2019. And what it is a short tunnel that connects Long Island Railroad's vast network of train lines that cover all of Long Island to the densest part of Manhattan in terms of jobs, which is the east side at Grand Central Terminal.
So currently it only goes to Penn Station.
That's right.
On the west side. It's a little counterintuitive to begin with. The train from the east winds up on the west side of Manhattan.
Yep.
So is it going to make an additional stop every single line on the Lirr?
No, the lines...
And then continue?
I'm sorry, no, the lines will break at Sunnyside Yards, and some trains, half of the trains will go to Grand Central and half will go to Penn Station.
Just like now, some go from Jamaica toward Flatbush.
That's right. That's exactly right.
And some go into Manhattan.
That's right.
Why is it taking so long? I've been hearing people talk about this plan for years already, and now you say 2019.
It's a very complicated project, and there's a lot of traffic already happening on that line, and to be able to build only at nights and on the weekends means that, you know, it takes 10 years to build the new line.
And what will it mean for the whole area? I read a lot of rosy predictions in the introductory copy. Does it really affect home prices on Long Island? Does it really affect how many jobs people have?
Oh, sure. I mean, listen, you live in New York, you know that being able to access your work fast is worth a lot of money. You pay more to live near a station, and you pay even more to live near a station that has a shorter commute to your job. People pay for that access. And so what we did was we calculated how many homes are within 2 miles of all Long Island Railroad stations, and we calculated how much faster people's commutes were going to be. And for those homes that are near the train stations, they will see their property values increase by $7,500. And that's 600,000 homes.
That's a lot,
of
homes with a little bit more equity.
That's right.
Yes.
Do you want to say anything about Long Island before we go to under that other river?
Yeah, I'd just say that it's another counterintuitive idea, but the trains will actually run in both directions. And you know, one of the big changes that's happened in Metro North Country and in Jersey Transit is that there's been an enormous growth in what planners call reverse commute services from New York City and and both Manhattan and the boroughs out to suburban employment centers. And that's going to happen on Long Island. It hasn't happened on Long Island because there hasn't been any capacity in the system. And that's one of the big opportunities, is to have those trains go the other way. There's an enormous shortage of workforce housing, affordable housing for workers on the island. Employers have been leaving the island because of it, and so this begins to change that. The other thing is that by cutting the travel times 25 minutes, something like that each way, it means that the commuter shed, the area that is within the convenient, commuting distance from Manhattan actually gets pushed out 20 or so miles out into central and almost eastern Suffolk County. So it has the potential to transform a large area of the island. A really terrific county executive out there, Steve Bellone, is now thinking strategically about how to develop and zone around the stations so that the next generation of development in the island is going to look more like the development that you see in Westchester or in North Jersey or in Fairfield County, where you see concentrations of new housing.
And land use changes? Are there land use changes coming too?
That's up to the towns. That's up to the towns. But you know, like Bob was saying, on Metro North, for example, they've invested a lot in the railway system, and they've gathered a lot of ridership by providing great reverse commute opportunities. And the towns around the stations there have built more housing and have built more office spaces and so on. And
around
so,
the train stations.
around the
I remember
train
when
stations.
Tom Swazi was the Nassau County Executive, he used to talk to me about wanting to build denser housing clusters around the
Right.
Long Island Railroad stations,
Yeah.
make it a little bit more urban in that respect, but hopefully nice. And of course, people don't want that for the most part on Long Island. They want, you know, private homes with
Right.
lawns and the whole Long Island thing.
Yeah.
And I think Mangano, the current county executive, is not pushing that idea. But Swazi was thinking in regional terms, and yet he had a lot of pushback from the residents of his own county.
But you know, that might also change. This new generation, people my age who are right now staying in apartments longer, they're getting married later, they are not really able to live on Long Island right now. There are not very many housing opportunities. They don't want to live in the house with the yard. They don't have 3 kids. And they can't, frankly, afford a lot of those homes. And so as my generation comes online, so to speak, we may provide demand for more apartment buildings near and more walkable
Right. So if
neighborhoods.
the
near
demand
stations.
is there, that's what'll really
That's
create
right.
it.
Although the
probably
zoning
more
still
than-
needs to be updated.
Well,
so that they can build.
So that they can build
more
it.
densely
I suspect that
around
in many of those downtowns, it's simply not allowed to build apartment buildings.
I'm just going to say that our mantra at RPA is that we need to be thinking about giving people choices. And you know, and what we're hearing more and more, particularly from Juliette's generation, the millennials, they want to, even on Long Island and in the suburbs, they want to be in places where there's sidewalks, shoe leather, where they don't need to drive everywhere, where they can use transit. They have that option if they don't want to sit in traffic. So more and more people are demanding that. I think the politics are going to start to change. We're seeing it change faster in Suffolk County. And of course, Suffolk County is where most of the development opportunities are on the island. Most of Nassau is built out at this point. So I think we'll see that in western and central Suffolk County, that's where the biggest impacts of this project are going to be. That's where we'll see the biggest changes.
So if we're talking about regional transportation by rail, how about New Jersey, Bob? Of course, very famously, Governor Christie nixed the so-called ARC tunnel,
Yep.
additional tunnel into and out of Manhattan.
Yep.
And yet there are plans, and people keep talking about alternatives to that.
Well, there is an alternative that's come forward, and it's being advanced by Amtrak. It's called the Gateway Tunnel, and it's in more or less the same alignment. Although it does make a change that Governor Christie called for when he killed the ARC project, and that is that it comes directly into Penn Station, provides redundancy. The governor was right, certainly, in looking at back from Sandy, what happened when we lost the existing 2 Penn Station tunnels, that we put the whole Northeast Corridor out of business. And the new Gateway tunnels, they will be designed to be flood-proof. They will not flood in an event like Sandy or even a more severe storm. And they'll come into Penn Station. And then as part of that, we're also looking at the idea of building a new Penn Station. And there's been some attention here in the city, less so in the suburbs, to this idea of moving the garden, building a new Penn Station. It's really part and parcel of the same project of creating new capacity from Jersey, under the rivers, in Manhattan, but really for the entire metropolitan area and the whole Northeast.
And there's so many jobs in New Jersey. That reverse commute must also be very meaningful.
It's a big deal for New Yorkers, and it's a big deal for New Jersey employers that they want to have access to this extraordinary workforce that you find in the city. It's all about, the reason companies stay here, come to New York and stay here and grow here, they want access to the skilled workforce that we have here. And it's across the region. It's better for everybody if, in fact, people can, forget about the political boundaries. The employers don't really care about the politics. They're interested in the workforce and having access to it. Everybody benefits when we create this capacity and make it possible for people to move across the river and so forth.
Can we show this slide of the mega regions? This is I think we're going to see a slide, there it is, of the United States. And when we think about the title of your organization, the Regional Plan Association, we really live in a series of regions, in addition to, of course, our own neighborhoods, which are so important to us. But that whole red Northeast corridor.
That's home. That's where we live. We're all citizens of the Northeast, and we did this map and this research behind it, which several years ago now, which found that most of the country, almost 3/4 of the country lives in one of 11 mega regions, and these are networks of metropolitan regions that increasingly have integrated economies and infrastructure systems and so forth. And what we found is that the enabler of additional economic success in these places is, in fact, intercity and high-speed rail, because they're too big to be easily navigated by automobile, too small to be easily navigated by air. And the airspace is filled, the airports are filled, the highways are filled, so rail is the way to go. Get you back to ARC and now the gateway tunnels. We need that capacity to unlock the potential of that big red area in the northeastern United States.
And I will say that the tunnels that are currently under the Hudson River, that currently connect New Jersey and New York, that currently run all of New Jersey Transit's trains in and out of Manhattan, and all of Amtrak's trains to Washington, D.C., run on one track in, one track out, which means that anytime there's a failure on either one of those tracks, it messes up the whole system up and down the corridor.
I guess Madison Square Garden just got what's considered a relatively short-term lease. What is it, like 15 years or something?
15 years, yeah.
They wanted the lease in
it's
perpetuity.
A special zoning permit is the term of art, and it's not a lease. It's a discretionary permit from the city of New York.
But I can't believe that those two things really wound up in opposition to each other. These
Well,
two major institutions in New York, that you couldn't have Madison Square Garden go on the way it wants to and have the renovation of Penn Station that so badly needs to occur.
Well, what we found in this 50-year experiment to have the garden sit on top of Penn Station is these are two really important activities for the city of New York: a world-class train station, a world-class arena. What we found is you can't do both of those things on the same site. No other place in the world has tried to do that. And so, what we and others are proposing is that the garden move about a block and a half away to the Morgan Postal Annex site, and build a new arena, which basically makes that a world-class facility like Barclays in Brooklyn or the others that have been built. The Garden is the oldest arena in the NBA, it's second oldest in the National Hockey League. It really is out of date. I think everybody knows it, even with the renovations that have happened. New Yorkers deserve better, and we certainly deserve a new train station.
Of course, it's great for the hockey and basketball and music fans. You go to your event at the Garden, and then you don't even think about it. You go downstairs and you get on the train and you go to wherever you live. But before you go, just give me 1 minute, Bob, on the 4th regional plan. The Regional Plan Association, your first plan was what, in like 1920?
In the 1920s, and a second one in the 1960s, and then I came back to New York. I'm a New York native, to lead the third plan in the 90s. And we're doing it, and I'm going to turn this over to Juliette in just a second because she's leading the plan at RPA. But the goal is the world has changed. Every generation or so you need to take a fresh look at the future of the region, the issues that we need to address. Sandy was a wake-up call. Mm-hmm. We've had a bunch of other wake-up calls.
And just very briefly, because we really are out of time, but just why do we need a regional plan? Because some people are going to hear this and say, oh, just what we need, central planning, telling everybody where to build and put their businesses and put their homes. The market will take care of it. It's a lot of people's individual initiatives that's going to define the region, not some think tank saying, okay, here's how we plan for everybody.
Yep. Well, it's one big economy. Political boundaries don't matter when it comes to an employer settling somewhere or drawing a workforce from the region. It's one ecology. It's one big region when it comes to threats from climate change.
When you finish it and there's an actual plan on paper with all kinds of cool proposals for the region, come back and talk about it.
Excellent.
We shall.
Thank you
you.
both very much.
Great, thanks.
In a moment, redesigning the Jersey Shore. Is nostalgia clouding the vision? Nine months after Sandy, the New Jersey Shore is at a crossroads. How are they going to rebuild? Like it was, or built to last? First, Star Ledger's Brian Donohue brings us down the shore.
And that's the Jersey Shore for you, right? We mark our time by its rituals. Prom weekends, the first time we take our kids on the rides our parents took us on, that one last ocean swim before school starts. And it's beautiful, but it ain't the Hamptons or Martha's Vineyard, my friend. Everybody's here. On the boardwalk in Asbury Park or Seaside Heights, you could bump into a blue blood from Princeton, a Wall Street billionaire, a family of new immigrants from Mexico, your plumber, or your governor.
Matthew, how old are you?
They've copied this all over the world, from England to Brazil. But we invented this experience, damn it. We do it in 50 different flavors, from Spring Lake to Wildwood. And even as so much of the rest of the world has become Disneyfied and commodified, with people walling themselves off into neighborhoods and malls that all look the same, we've always had this. Mother Nature's beautiful beach and ocean right alongside this crazy human carnival. Now look at it. Look what Sandy did to it. We all had our spots, these places that we were hoping so hard had survived the storm. Maybe it was the bench your grandmother liked to sit on to watch the ocean, or the bar where you met your husband or your wife. We wanted to check up on them like relatives we hadn't heard from. I set out to look at a few of mine, hoping they might yield some clues as to what the shore itself might look like down the road. First stop, one of my regular surf spots in Spring Lake, just 3 blocks down from the Belmar Beach where my parents first met, in the water. 2 kids from Jersey City, my mother first catching my dad's eye with her body surfing skills. Like, just knowing that you're in the same waters where your parents met, it's like a salmon finding its way back to the waters where they spawned somehow, you know? And it really roots you into place, and it really does give you the urge to just try to take everything and put it back exactly where it was.
Again, the man whose words we just heard, capturing the emotional heart of so many shore residents, is Brian Donohue, who joins us now. Donohue, reporter and Jersey Shore resident, produces Ledger Live, the Star Ledger's webcast. He has followed the post-Sandy rebuild from the beginning. Also with us via Skype, marine geologist Stewart Farrell, founding director of the Coastal Research Center at Richard Stockton College in Galloway. Welcome to both of you. Thank you for coming on.
Thanks for having us.
Brian, when was that shot? That was a beautiful video.
That was shot in, I believe it was November, so about 2 months, 8 weeks after the storm, and I had been covering Sandy nonstop, and my editor called me in and said he wanted a longer piece, and he said, you know, I'm not a shore guy. I've never really gotten it. He said, I want someone to tell me what the big deal is.
And is it more put back together now than then in the scenes that you showed us?
It's a very mixed picture, you know. I mean, a lot of the summer is here, and the boardwalks and a lot of the business areas are up and running, and you could go there and park your car by the beach and go on the boardwalk and think that not a lot has changed. But as you go into some of the neighborhoods and you really plumb a little bit deeper, there is a long way to go, and it's very uncertain what this place is going to look like.
And Stewart, from your perspective as a marine geologist, first there was Irene, and then Sandy, of course. Do you get the sense with the 1-2 punch that suddenly people's whole relationship with the shore is changing compared to what it was a few years ago?
Well, a lot of folks have become, had gotten pretty confident that nothing much was going wrong, because from 1992 to 2009, there were basically no storms to worry about. So they got pretty much sure of themselves that there wasn't going to be an issue. But then November 2009, Northeaster, another one in 2010, Hurricane Irene, and then the big hit of all, of course, was Sandy. So yes, it's probably shaken a lot of folks up right to the core.
Brian, the film, at least that film, was long on nostalgia and short on talk about sustainability and whether to rebuild in a way that would be different, maybe what they call a managed retreat from the shore or whatever. And there's a sense that I think New Jerseyans with connections to the shore, who I know, are divided about, and that is whether to try to put it back where it was because that's who we are, damn it.
That's the emotional urge.
Right.
And, my documentary got such an overwhelming reaction. I got people saying they were crying into their keyboards as they watched it. And I think I'm having a little bit of regret in that I've become the sort of put it back the way it was guy. And I'm starting to become very worried that that's what's happening at the Jersey Shore. And I don't think there is a choice. I don't think rebuilding in a way that protects the sort of egalitarian nature of the shore and what the shore has always been and making it environmentally sustainable, I don't think those are mutually exclusive. The problem that I see is it's going in the third direction, which is it is being more difficult. The new houses have to be built higher. It's basically a recipe for more McMansions and fewer bungalows. So I don't think there's, it's one or the other.
And you called it a Disneyfication of the shore, right?
That is what has been happening, I think, that was my word, over the past several decades. Places like Long Branch, which used to have the traditional boardwalk with games and rides and all that funky boardwalk culture, that's become sort of a place with upscale restaurants and condos. Belmar was another town where you could play skee ball and arcades, and that has become much more sort of gentrified with fewer summer rentals. So there's been this sort of creeping, I think, economic trend where the middle class, which is what the Jersey Shore was. The Jersey Shore has been an egalitarian place where everyone, different towns, all have a different character, and everybody could kind of find their place. That has been slowly eroding over the past several decades. And my concern was and is that Sandy is going to speed that process up.
And Stewart, is there a marine geologist's take on the right way to rebuild?
Well, a lot of the rebuilding plans have been passed on to some professional engineers. The Army Corps of Engineers, both New York and Philadelphia District, have responsibility for the state's shoreline from a federal standpoint. And the state of New Jersey has its own engineering bureau in Toms River, all of whom are seeking to do a better job of rebuilding with wider beaches and taller dunes, so that the event that took out most of the central part of Ocean County and smashed up Spring Lake, Belmar, and rolled over the boardwalk in Asbury Park can be sort of kept at bay, at least unless there's a worse storm in our future. This is possible because where those projects were in fact completed, the damage from the waves was far, far less in terms of what was happening in the storm events where the process had not been completed.
Brian, you have a response to that, though?
I did, and I saw places. I did a video about replenishment in the dune issue.
And we're going to show a little bit of that in a minute, but go ahead.
Right, and Chris Christie has, and a lot of people have said, engineered beaches fared better. I did a video on a place called Midway Beach in the South Seaside Park section of Berkeley Township. There's no engineered beaches there. What there was this classic Jersey Shore bungalow community of middle-class people, very small, low-scale slung bungalows, and they were smart enough not to build too close when they built it, the planners. And in the subsequent decades, the past 30 years or so, they also had a few small group of homeowners who really understood how beaches work. And they started putting sand fences down and Christmas trees, and over the past 30 years, they built a massive dune system using the wind and fencing and Christmas trees.
What do you mean by Christmas trees?
Christmas, yes, old Christmas trees are placed on the sand, and then when an onshore wind blows the sand, they sort of stop the sand and dunes build up around that.
So here's a short excerpt of an April video that Brian made for the Star Ledger, and this is about the battle over dune easements in one town, and he reported at that time that only 5 out of 28 owners had signed on or indicated that they would sign the easements. Which town is this video taken in?
In Toms River, I believe.
All right, check it out.
Now, this refusal to sign the easements is infuriating people who live on the west side of Barnegat Bay in towns like Brick, who say their areas were flooded when the ocean overwashed the barrier island because towns didn't have dunes. It's also pissing off another guy who lives in Morris County. He's the governor.
We would go town by town, and if we have to start calling names out of the selfish ones who care more about their view than they care about the safety and the welfare of their neighbors, then we're going to start doing that.
Well, Governor, you can start with this guy, John McDonough. McDonough owns much of the land in Toms River's Ocean Beach, a community of classic bungalows whose owners, most of them, lease the land for McDonough. And he's not signing any easement.
We don't feel we need the dunes larger than what we have. We feel that the width of the beach is more important than how high the dune is.
As we're sitting here watching a house be knocked down by a storm, to say that you don't need bigger dunes.
If you subscribe to the theory that the dunes would stop any storm and every storm, I suppose you could make that argument. We happened to just run into that perfect storm where we had a late hurricane coming with an early nor'easter hitting at exactly the same time. And so we believe, I believe, and most of the folks I talk to down here think that was a once-in-a-100-year storm. I'm sure there's folks out there say, oh no, this is the result of global warming. We're going to see these storms every couple of years. That's a matter of someone's opinion.
Brian, what's the root of the resistance by guys like him to the dunes? What don't they like about sand dunes?
A lot of people have, I think, a misperception out there that it's all about the views and they don't want their ocean views blocked, but it's really not. It's all about the great Jersey Shore tradition of keeping, the not so great tradition of keeping the riffraff out, I like to say it. They are worried, a lot of people, including John McDonough, who you see there, that if taxpayer money is used to build the dunes and replenish the beaches, that they're going to have to allow the public on those beaches. There is a phrase in these easements that they're really hung up on called keeping the rights, the public trust doctrine, rights under the public trust doctrine to
Public access to the beach.
Right.
That's absolutely
These are private
correct.
beaches.
That's the way it's
Stewart,
going
go ahead.
That's the way it's going to be. Public access for public funding. And, you know, these people seem to fail to remember that most of the riffraff they don't want on their beach don't want to go to their beach anyway because there's nothing much to do other than sit and watch the waves. They want to go to Belmar, they want to go to Seaside Park, they want the boardwalks, they want the rides, they want the entertainment. That's where most folks want to go. The whole bit about showing the nostalgia of New Jersey coast is that nostalgia. The folks in Mantoloking, we had endless arguments with them in the summer of 2007, individual one-on-one discussions about why they wouldn't sign easements. And we said, they're not busing them in from Camden. I'm sorry, they're just not going to do that. And so these myths and misconceptions have added to the fuel. I'm not giving away my prescriptive rights to my property. And they're not really giving away anything. It's just a permit to allow the project to proceed and to allow the individual, you and me, access to that publicly funded beach.
And we know what Camden is a code word for. But Brian, what about the numbers now? Have more people signed?
This is just in Toms River. Now, we're just talking about the town of Toms River.
Okay. But it's probably representative of thinking up and down the shore.
It is very representative. And that's going to be about, this John McDonough, that case is going to go to court, I think. They're going to wind up in court. They're only up to, I believe, 15 or 17 of the 30 easements they need in Toms River.
And just give us, before we go, Stewart, a scientist's answer to his take on what Sandy actually meant. And you could make that case. You know, you have on the one hand Governor Cuomo in New York saying the 100-year storms are now coming every 2 years and policy has to be based on that. Or I think what he said is, at least on the surface, accurate, which is that you had a very rare, very late hurricane that collided with an early winter-type nor'easter system, and so maybe it is a 100-year storm. How do we know?
Well, we don't, and that's the point. This, you have to understand, a 100-year storm doesn't mean it comes once every 100 years. It means that it has a 1% chance of occurring in any given year. So that 1% chance could be, you know, you win the lottery once in a while, and some people win it twice in 6 months. So randomness to the storm pattern. Are storms getting more intense? The answer is yes. Will they be intense in New Jersey as opposed to the Gulf of Mexico? Perhaps not as, commonly. So we are going to get more storms. We went through 20 years with almost nothing in the way of storms, and now since 2009, we've had 5.
What would be a shame, Brian, is if it becomes so expensive to build back whether it's where they were or whether it's moved back in, that instead of the old-fashioned Jersey Shore experience with the bungalows that the working class families could come down and afford, and the whole thing, that it's now going to become luxury hotels.
Let me share a quick story. In North Carolina, I was doing a story about houses being elevated, and there are these work crews who had been the past 7 years raising houses after Katrina in the Gulf Coast. And I ran into a contractor, a builder from North Carolina there. And he said that in North Carolina, there's a statewide coastal commission, which was rejected by Christie and in New Jersey, which dictates coastal development along the entire coast, an idea that's been pushed aside in New Jersey. And some of the rules there say that you cannot rebuild in certain places when a house is destroyed. So this guy bought a $13,000 lot near the ocean because it's worthless, they can't build on it. He rolls his trailer on there in the spring and rolls his trailer off in the fall. And that's what the Jersey Shore used to be, a place where a contractor could have a little place by the shore, and that's environmentally sustainable at the same time. So he's out of the way. When a hurricane comes, he pulls it off.
Right.
Well, there's one such place in New Jersey. It happens to be down in the town of Upper Township in Cape May County. It's the only place where RVs are right on the shoreline at the beach, where you can just walk out of the trailer, across the road, and you're in the ocean.
Well, the only thing we know about the future is that it's going to be different from the past. And we'll find out how on the Jersey Shore as the next few years go on. Thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Back in a moment with New York's dilemma: block the next flood with dikes or kind of go with the flow. We turn now to New York City's coastline. Vigorous debates about the best way to protect it and the city from the next Sandy are taking place as we speak. Joining us for an insider's look are architects Michael Sorkin, Distinguished Professor and Director of the Graduate Program of Urban Design at City College, and Catherine Seavitt Nordenson, Associate Professor of Landscape Architecture, also of City College. Both are veterans of two recent CUNY conferences, Waterproofing New York and Beyond Waterproofing. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Catherine, are there basically two visions right now? Is that too dichotomous a way to put it? The sort of soft vision and hard vision I've heard them called?
I mean, it's not really that clear as a binary opposition. And what we were looking at with Waterproofing New York, which I co-organized with Denise Hoffman-Brandt, who's the program director at the School of, in the program of Landscape Architecture, was to really think about how are there other things that we need to think about, which are really the sectors of infrastructure that are throughout the city, and how those things need to be thought about as both soft and also hard. So there are some things that you need to harden up and protect. There are other things that actually do better if you don't engineer them.
So I want to show some slides, and Michael, you're, I guess, known as sort of a proponent of the hard approach, and we're going to show some...
Don't tar me with that brush, Brian.
You don't want that brush.
No, I think Catherine and I are agreed that a combination of approaches is what's necessary in the place next to
but
New York.
we're going to show some slides and walk us through this, and we're going to see, and there's an example of a hard barrier. This is a physical barrier to storm surge, I guess. What is it and where is it?
This was a kind of an instant project that we did for the Museum of Modern Art in the Rockaways. And the basic proposition here is to build a dike, but then to figure out a way of paying for it. So the idea behind this scheme is that there's housing on top of the dike, so that you create a very desirable piece of property and finance it by some construction above.
Mm-hmm. And that was just an example. Well, okay, here's another view. What are we looking at?
This is a plan of that's very schematic, but the Rockaways are certainly a place that either have to be protected by some rigid infrastructure or abandoned. So when we talk about a series of oppositions, that's one that has to be added. The possibility is that we need to evacuate certain zones of the city. That simply building defensive barriers or soft systems won't cut it in these fragile environments.
And this looks like the same thing as before, but from the top?
Yeah, it's just a slightly less sexed up, photoshopped view of the same thing.
But wait, can we go back to that for a second? This is really only, what, a few yards wide at its highest point. So what is this really representing? Because you don't know where along that shoreline the surge is going to take place the worst, right?
Right. I mean, the whole scheme, I don't know if you have that image, is basically one that finds a 28-foot contour on Long Island and follows it all the way to Staten Island, which is the level, the defensive level. So if something like this were to be built, it would only work with flood barriers in Jamaica Bay and a dike all the way along the Rockaway Peninsula.
And Catherine, as we look at this, is there anything in this that you object to, or does this fit in a certain way with the vision that you have? And we'll see some other slides that you'll walk us through shortly.
Well, I would say, I mean, it's interesting because it works as a system, and I think what we're really all interested in is how do we think systemically? And what Michael has here as this porous boundary that you can actually see through is actually quite interesting, and it's not what you usually think of in terms of a seawall or a storm surge barrier. On the other hand, it's fixed in its place, and so unlike a dune, as you spoke in the earlier segment, it can't actually morph and move as it would normally under the conditions of wind and wave. So this is fixed and it won't actually change, but it does do some very clear engineering solutions which are set a datum and build to that datum, and that sometimes can be a problematic situation.
I think one of the things that we're also emphasizing in these schemes is a notion of proportionality. You know, if it cost $50 billion to repair the damage of Sandy, that means that we can begin to think in fairly extravagant terms about solutions, whether they be hard ones or soft ones.
And this is a side view, almost like a cross-section of the same thing,
This
Michael?
is exactly a cross-section, yeah. Showing the way in which the existing neighborhood texture is preserved behind this dike with some facilities, maybe parking
And
embedded
folks,
within.
you could see that structure, I guess, sort of in the middle left there, the red line going down to it where it says floodgate plus 28 feet, right?
Yeah, that's the datum that we established for protecting against flood, was this plus 28 level.
That's where you need to go, meaning that the number. When you say the datum, you mean the number?
The height above sea level to protect against
Plus
a
28 feet.
giant surge.
All right. You brought some pictures too, right?
I did, yes.
Let's see.
I've actually been working quite a while on offshore structures. Prior to both Irene and Sandy, together with Guy Nordenson and Adam Urinsky, we published a book called On the Water, Palisade Bay, and we looked at the upper bay of New York Harbor and thought about how could soft infrastructures like islands, wetlands, slips, create a kind of multi and redundant soft system that could diminish wave velocity and the extent of flood. When we worked with Waterproofing New York and beyond Waterproofing New York, I was very interested in the two sectors of both transportation and parks and recreation, which were two of the five that we examined, and how those things could actually, as upland elements, could also start to actually get to the roots of the underpinning of why we're facing climate change, which is really carbon emissions. So that became a kind of a different kind of provocation, not in the water to stop the effects, but actually to mitigate rather than immediately adapt. Start to think about mitigating CO2 emissions.
Then you got to get China to do it. You got to get the rest of the world
to do it.
to do it.
It's a global phenomenon, absolutely, yeah. But we've been reaching some other, in terms of the cost of Sandy, we've also reached some new heights in carbon in our atmosphere.
All right, what are we looking at here?
What you're looking at here, actually, it's nice to segue on RPA, because actually they mentioned their 1929 plan, which was the first regional plan, which was really the era of the car and the automobile. So pushing cars through Manhattan was really part of their regional planning. How can you get across the Hudson into Long Island via this thing in the way, Manhattan? So Robert Moses really picked up on that, and what you're seeing here is one of his two cross-Manhattan approaches. This one has a wonderful acronym of the LOMAX. The LOMAX, which is the Lower Manhattan Expressway, which would have connected the Hudson across to Brooklyn. And the next slide, if you look at that one, you actually see a kind of provocation. It's not literally a proposal, but a provocation to say, if we can do something that bold and systemic, why couldn't we actually plant that with a forest? And so start thinking about the carbon capture in the woody tissues of trees, which actually is an incredible absorber of carbon just as a natural system. Here's an image of how that might look as a different proposal, transforming house and street.
Instead of building another highway system, you're saying build some greenways right in the middle of the city.
Right, exactly. And these could be very big things. So it's kind of picking up on the million trees, but except being much more specific and dense. And so put a million trees all in one place instead of a few street trees here and there throughout the boroughs, but to be very systematic about taking an entire swath. It's not unlike some of what Jeanette Sedekhan is doing now with the bike initiatives and closing Broadway. So we have the vision. And so what we tried to do with waterproofing was really to create a provocation to say, well, if we could have thought about that in the 1950s and 60s, why can't we think about this now?
What's this and when?
This is another one. This is actually the Midtown Expressway, which connected the Lincoln Tunnel across to the Midtown Tunnel, and
Which
here you
never
see
happened.
it. Which never happened, thank goodness. But here you could imagine, like, what if it had been a different vision to actually plant a forested urban woodland across that same swath?
Fascinating.
And this is just an image of the before and after. Here's a typical street scene in Manhattan, but you could start to think about this, what I've kind of tongue-in-cheek named the 4X in honor of the Lomex, what that could be like if you actually took a street like Houston and planted it densely with urban street trees to create a real woodland.
So in our last few minutes, do the two visions that we've seen from the two of you complement each other? Do they work together? And I realize they're both kind of hypothetical and abstract, and they're not necessarily supposed to go up just the way you envision them for these projects.
Sure. We're going to have some complex vision if we're going to truly protect the city, which will combine hard and soft systems. But again, I want to make the argument about proportionality. The first time we studied this idea of a self-financing levee was in New Orleans, and we did a much more elaborate scheme after Katrina for a place called Algiers. And one of the reasons we were looking at levees was that you know, the piece of information that was most resonant for me after Katrina, when everybody was saying, you know, we've wiped out the wetlands and it's all has to do with global warming and too much carbon in the atmosphere and dangerous habits of consumption, was that in order to mitigate the effects of 1 foot of storm surge, you needed 1 mile of wetlands. So if we are going to deal with 28 feet of storm surge, that's a proposition about 28 miles of wetlands in the Atlantic Ocean, which is clearly not on.
Right.
Which means that if you're looking in terms of the scale of the enterprise, that a soft system is not always going to save you.
So a quick reaction from each of you
Yeah.
to Mayor Bloomberg's proposal for these retractable seawalls?
I don't know if he's proposing that. Actually, I think that might be a misunderstanding, but I think that there are some places where those would be important to be used, but actually I think in answer to the depth of wetlands, something that does work and how our two systems, which are both linear in nature, we actually have another vision of 4X, which actually takes the Belt Parkway just beyond where Michael's inhabitable levee wall is. And recent research is also looking at how vegetation actually can be tested in digital hydraulic models, and the deeper and the taller the density of that vegetated mass, linear forest, we could say, it actually does reduce both the height of the surge and the wave velocity significantly. So in a way, a linear forest can act like a seawall. And it's to say also that we don't necessarily need to rely on a binary system that either floods or doesn't flood, but rather one that can be more pervious, that can say we can control the flooding, but we don't have to have, we can have controlled flooding without having stopped flooding. So to know where water would go and how and where it will advance or not.
No, we're in complete agreement, but I think also important to bear in mind that there's a difference between a very energetic and infrequent storm and the effects of climate change in terms of sea level rise, which require different kinds of strategies. You know, sea level rise is something that doesn't happen on an annual or a 10-year basis. It will be there all the time. So that means that there's a kind of general raising, a general amphibiousness that's going to have to come to the waterfront of New York, whether via soft systems, hard systems, abandonment, amphibious systems. We need to deal with all 600 miles worth.
And is there a class question here? Because I think we've gone through this historical cycle in New York where 100 years ago, the shore was where rich people lived. And then 50 years ago, somehow that had broken down and the shore was where poor people lived. It was considered undesirable, and there were docks and, you know, it was shipping territory and, you know, kind of run down. And then in the last 20 years, it's again become where rich people live.
Right.
Does this cycle come back into play as we reimagine the environment?
A lot of it has to do with where you are, and real estate is, you know, obviously a movable target. So I think what's very interesting is we've seen a very highly industrialized waterfront because of our reliance on shipping in the 19th century, which slowly is in a period of demise. And now we're seeing, with the Bloomberg administration, looking at developing those waterfront parcels. Meanwhile, back in the 50s and the 60s, again, Robert Moses put a lot of NYCHA housing out in the floodplains in the Rockaways and Coney Island.
Why?
And I think he actually thought that that was, there are a lot of, there's a huge debate about that. And on the one hand, he thought it was a healthful environment. On the other hand, it was a way of taking minorities out of the greater city and displacing them. So there are huge issues of environmental justice that are at play here. Yeah. And we see so many of these NYCHA projects which are in floodplains, which we saw very painfully in Red Hook, the Rockaways, and Coney Island,
Lower East Side,
trying to shelter in place in a kind of construction which was not capable of providing the services they needed.
It was Moses who thought, fresh sea air was a cure for blackness, and, but not. The city is also pursuing a kind of binary attitude towards the waterfront. Most plans that we've seen in the last decade or so tend to be either high-rise housing for rich people a la Battery Park City, or what's happening on the East River waterfront, or else parks. And I think we're both interested in seeing a much more variegated waterfront. The restoration of some of the working functions of the waterfront, a variety of hard and soft barriers, transportation activity. I mean, you can barely get a clam on the New York City waterfront, and I think that's something we'd like to see.
But something else which I think is really important is thinking about the 28 feet, or now we've seen in the Rockaways, the city has provided bathrooms and changing facilities that are at a 19-foot datum. So all of these datums, which we believe in because our minds work that way, are really all mobile. And it's the same way of thinking about the waterfront. It's really not a line in the plan that divides land from water. It's a gradient, and it moves back and forth. And so I think we have to really start to realize how coastlines work and how the shoreline is an entity which is actually a dynamic one. Barrier islands don't go away just because you pave them over.
And for us as designers, this is this amphibious condition, the gradient, this dense shore, this broad shoreline, offers incredibly exciting possibilities and great scope for invention.
And is it a public-private partnership? I mean, I've watched the West Side bike path develop over the last, 20 years in Manhattan. I never thought I would see what there is now today, which is along the water access, basically, for bicycles and pedestrians, from one tip of Manhattan to the other on the West Side.
Yeah, no, fantastic things are happening. The bike share program is absolutely wizard. It's just great. But this is a kind of illusory beast, this public-private partnership, because we know the West Side Park is broke. It can't finance itself on that model. So, I'm somebody who feels strongly that there should be much more substantial public commitment to the provision of these amenities.
I would agree entirely, and I think that we really need, as we are a public university, and we actually really believe in what we do in terms of education. And we also believe in provocation, and I think that this really does have to come at a kind of public greater good for everyone, and that's really where the justice issues play in, and all of the other ways of sustaining our city life.
We got the past, we got the present, we got the future in that conversation, and some good visuals to boot. Thank you both very, very much.
You're welcome.
You're welcome.
Time once again for our weekly Public Intellectual segment, where we examine new research that has the power to transform our thinking and public policy. Today, talent versus hard work. Malcolm Gladwell famously suggested that the magic number for greatness is 10,000, generally understood to mean 10,000 hours of practice can make us perfect at almost anything, from spelling to surgery. Many psychologists have studied what it actually takes to make us experts. Scott Barry Kaufman has published a compendium of such research entitled The Complexity of Greatness Beyond Talent or Practice. His new book is called Ungifted, Intelligence Redefined. And with us as well via Skype from Illinois, Michigan State University professor Zachary Hambrick. He is the lead author of the paper Deliberate Practice, Is That All It Takes to Become an Expert? Welcome to both of you. Hi.
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 And Professor Hambrick, you actually reanalyzed existing data for your study. Is that correct?
That's right.
What did you look at?
So deliberate practice is a term coined by the Florida State University psychologist Anders Ericsson and his colleagues, and it refers to engaging in activities that are created specifically to elevate performance in a domain. So Erickson and his colleagues have argued strongly that we can explain individual differences in people's performance in various domains like music and chess and others in terms of the amount of practice that they've accumulated. So the goal of this study was to test Erickson's theory. So we identified 6 studies of chess and 8 studies of music that looked at the relationship between practice and performance. And basically we asked the question, how strong is the relationship? And basically what we found is that only about 1/3 of the differences in performance in both chess and music can be accounted for by deliberate practice.
Why do we care? Why do we want to know as a society exactly what the correlations are between practice and high performance at anything, as opposed to other factors like genetics or whatever else it might be that contributes to expertise and excellence?
First of all, I want to say hi, Zach.
Hi, Scott.
We're friends, so it's good to see him.
Good.
He does great research. I think that we need to differentiate between different kinds of different people care about this for different reasons. I think the scientists care about it for a different reason than the person who's personally trying to be great in a field. Now, there may be overlapping. Sometimes scientists may try to be great, but I think that the scientists who are studying this stuff, like Zach, me, and a whole bunch of other colleagues in this field, are trying to really understand from a scientific point of view what actually is explaining the differences between people and these outcomes. But everyday people, or people that are in sports, business, music, art, are obviously fascinated with this from a very personal reason. They want to know just how much, I think at the essence of this, they want to know how much of it is beyond their control and how much is within their control. I think at the end of the day, it all comes down to that. And I think there's so many misconceptions about what it means for something to have to be determined by, quote, innate talent or practice. There's so many misconceptions about this. We tend to think that if something was entirely environmentally determined, that somehow that would be easier to change than if there were genetic contributions, which is completely false. That's a misconception. Social engineering is not that good where if something was completely environmentally determined. And I don't think any serious scientists thinks of innate talent as meaning it's fully formed at birth. I think that we've reached a much more nuanced understanding in the majority of the field, and I think Zach would agree with that. We've reached a much more nuanced understanding that innate talent doesn't mean born at birth. It just means that it's whatever traits, or it could be personality traits, it could be even motivation, it could be a variety of factors that make it more likely that you'll get more bang for your buck out of a given training regimen. And I think that if we kind of evolved our conversation about these topics beyond such simplistic notions as talent versus practice, genes versus environment, we really would actually be able to help people get there better.
Interesting. So, Zach, do you think that there's an application of this research and both of your interpretation of these studies for more ordinary people trying to live more ordinary lives but with some success? In other words, when you talk about high performance in music and chess, well, how many people are going to become Yo-Yo Ma? Not that many, because there isn't a market but for so many concert cellists in the world. How many Bobby Fishers are there going to be? There are only few people who can make a living ever playing chess. So what about people who just want to maximize within sort of normal professions where there's an abundance of jobs, but they want to be pretty good at what they do? Is it relevant for that?
Sure. I would say that there's no denying the power of practice. It has far-reaching effects on performance, and I think that it can take people further than they ever thought possible. So I'm certainly in favor of more research aimed at identifying the exact conditions that maximize performance, the exact training conditions. What I would also say is that another important area for research is to identify traits, basic abilities, and other trait-like factors that forecast people's success in domains.
What do you mean by traits? Give me an example of traits.
A an example of a trait is general intelligence. Another example is personality characteristics like conscientiousness, neuroticism, and so on.
Competitiveness, is that one?
Sure, achievement, motivation, things like this. So I think, again, my conclusion based on the evidence is that we simply can't account for all of the differences across people in performance in terms of practice. There's a whole lot more to it. Now, the silver lining in this is that if we identify characteristics that forecast success in particular domains, we can give people good information about where they're most likely to succeed. And then people can make good decisions about how they want to invest their resources in training. And I think that people then might have a better chance of actually becoming experts through deliberate practice.
You have a personal story, right?
I do. From a first-person view, I have a unique vantage point on this because I was never someone that my teachers thought was particularly intelligent. I had a learning disability when I was very, very young, an auditory processing disorder, which caused it to be a little difficult for me to process things in real time. And that label was sort of slapped on me and kept there for a very long time. Until 9th grade, someone who was in my special education classroom, a teacher, took me aside and said, you know, I think I can tell you're bored. Let's, you know, see what you might be capable of. And if no one believed in me and if no one gave me those extra challenges, I don't think I would have be here today at all.
Well, this has been fascinating, and obviously the conversation about excellence continues. Thank you both very much for having part of it here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And that's our program for this week. We debut a new show every Wednesday evening at 7:30, and tune into my radio program weekdays 10 a.m. till noon on WNYC 93.9 FM and AM 820. I'm Brian Lirr. Thanks for watching.